The world of Adam, our world today, was born from the supernatural. The moment mankind began his journey, he lived side by side with the mysterious. The Bible? It's so much more than the Word of God. It's an ancient library originally comprised of 81 books and authored by men who lived with the miraculous. Powerful deities, fallen angels, spirits, and more. Our guide to the before time. The arcane begins in Genesis and branches into the Garden of Eden. We know the story of Eve and the talking serpent. Let's take a closer look at this event. Adam and Eve are together in the garden, and they happen upon the talking serpent. It is here where the cunning serpent weaves a lie of beautiful promise to the fated couple, the promise to be like God, and it is here we glimpse the supernatural. Eve answered the serpent, "There is no surprise, no wonder at a talking snake. This strange encounter was natural to Adam and Eve. Perhaps they had conversed before. And maybe, just maybe, Eden holds more intrigue than we've been taught. We may never know the true curiosities in the Garden of Eden, but we do know this. The Nakash was more crafty than any other beast of the field the Lord God had made. And with that fateful conversation began the fall of man. The allure of knowledge didn't vanish with Adam and Eve. And some 2,800 years ago, the ancient Greeks boldly sought out the dead, more specifically, the practice of necromancy. Many civilizations practice different forms of necromancy, from Egypt to Babylon. And this ritual was so rooted in Greek culture that in the famous poem The Odyssey, we find our hero Odysseus descending into the underworld, where he creates a pit filled with the blood of animal sacrifice. And with this, he is able to see and speak to the soul of his mother Anticlea. We also see this practice in the Bible. In the book of Samuel and the witch of Endor, she is requested by a desperate and incognito King Saul to summon the dead prophet Samuel. And the prophet, unhappy to be summoned, delivers a prophecy of doom against Saul and his men. Yes, the ancients were obsessed with the dead and their rituals to communicate with them. But this obsession, it's only grown with time. Decades later, in the 20th century, Dr. Raymond Moody, a parapsychologist, would become famous for his work on afterlife and near-death experiences. Dr. Moody, wanting to help those whose grief was great, believed if they could contact their lost loved ones, the experience would help the individual to resolve feelings of grief, loss, and guilt. And while searching for a way to help his patients, Dr. Moody took notice of the ancient rituals and other cultures of necromancy and began the modern practice of a psychomantium. A psychomantium is often a darkened room or enclosed space with a mirror, comfortable chair, and dim light source. The room is kept dark to aid in sensory deprivation, and that deprivation encourages a trance-like state helpful for the induction of visions. The chair is positioned to be able to look into the mirror, but not to see yourself. Oh no, it's to see into the darkness of the room. The viewers were instructed to focus on images and memories of their departed loved ones, so as to call forth their deceased with more ease. Once seated and focused on the void of reflective darkness, they would silently focus and call to their dead. Some of the participants would experience apparitions of the departed and feelings of connection and resolution. Others would experience nothing, yet a few would experience something different. And while there are many, many accounts of people who used a psychomantium and are connected to Dr. Moody, there are other accounts of those who discovered the rituals all on their own. At 55 and weary of life, Stephen Zellner was one such person. Some say he was a man grief-stricken over the loss of a beloved grandmother. Other accounts say he wanted to settle the score and he sought revenge. Either way, having read about the ancient Greeks and necromancy, whether he knew it or not, Stephen set up a psychomantium in his New Jersey home. He blacked out the windows in one of the rooms, selected an ornate mirror, set up a chair and a small table with a lamp that contained a dimly lit red bowl. The table and lamp sat behind the chair, and he then positioned the mirror and chair so he could see nothing but the reflective darkness. Hour after hour, day after day, obsession began to take hold. At first, Stephen would catch a fleeting glimpse of shadowy figures, just a flash, and maybe a whiff of something foul. The shadowy figures flamed his obsession, and slowly the shadowy figures became clearer and clearer, and he could not only see the spirits, but he began to see the future too. Beyond the spirits and visions, Stephen discovered he was able to send the spirits and cause misfortune to any he wanted. Stephen Zellner let loose the spirits on his enemies, and after months of commanding the spirits to do his bidding, these same spirits began to torment Stephen. Plagued with shadowy figures, now in every room of his house, he began to hear voices outside of the mirror. Violence erupted in his home. Heavy breathing tormented him. Doors would open and slam. Objects around the house began to move on their own. Stephen knew the spirits had taken control of his home, and knowing what the spirits were capable of, Stephen began to fear for his life. Stephen reached out to the local Catholic priest, pleading for help. Please, anything that can help me, anyone. Desperation had taken hold. The priest, unable to help, gave a frightened and despairing Zellner the phone number to a couple in the area, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Zellner called on the Warrens and explained his plight, the ritual, the uninvited guests, all he had done. Dropping everything, Warrens came to Zellner's aid. Almost immediately, they were greeted by tormenting spirits and a dark infestation. Ed and Lorraine quickly performed a reverse incantation and drove the spirits back, sealing them into the mirror from which they had come. Thankful for the Warrens, Zellner had one last request. He pleaded for them to take the mirror with them. He could not bear the source of his torment in his home. Seeing the mirror could still pose a supernatural threat, the Warrens agreed to take the mirror and had it blessed often to keep the evil at bay. And so it became another object in the collection that would later become a part of their occult museum. While there are many more chilling stories like Mr. Zellner's, let's take a closer look at the uninvited evil that can slither into our lives. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly spaces. Welcome to the first episode of Rebel Road. I'm your host, Mary.
And I'm your host, Haley. Welcome to the show. We hope that Rebel Road will become one of your new favorite podcasts. We've had a great time getting it up and going.
Yes, please be gentle. It's been wonderful getting this going. And a little disclaimer before we get too far along in our podcast today, but we do not endorse the summoning of the dead or making of a psychomantium in your home. It's very bad for you. Please don't do that. Yeah, don't do that.
Yes, absolutely agree, Mary. We just don't know what's talking back to us. It could be a demon. It could be a familiar spirit, a skinwalker. I mean, really, we just don't know. So put that planchette down and back away. Yeah, you just don't want that in your life.
If it's related to the occult, just say no, especially if it's trying to contact anything. Just walk away.
Yeah, but you know who didn't walk away? Zellner from our opening story.
True, and look what happened to him. We definitely don't want any of that.
It could have been way worse, though, luckily for him. I mean, just in the story, we think about that, and he did have some help. The Warrens, and anybody that's familiar with the paranormal knows the Warrens. It's really referenced a lot in the movies that we watch, and it's a catalyst in today's paranormal investigators, their work that they've done. But when you look through history, I think we've always been fascinated with the unseen. I say we, but I just mean people in general. And Ed Warren, he took that to really a whole different level. Wasn't he a demonologist?
Yeah, professed and self-taught. That's
So
something.
how
Yeah, that's something fun for the resume, right? I mean, not
yeah,
many
so
people can say that.
what would you consider a demonologist?
Ed just wasn't a demonologist, he was an exorcist too, and people might get that confused. Those are two very different things. But let's maybe look at what a demonologist is. And I want to make a little distinction here because I believe Ed was a Christian demonologist. I don't know if that's a real thing or if that's just a phrase I'm using. But he wasn't learning to tap into the dark arts and the uninvited things of the supernatural. I don't think he was learning for power, for personal gain. I think he was studying demonology so that he could defend against the demons and drive them back. So I want to be clear that be it haunting, spirits, cryptids, aliens, anything like that's going to bring controversy and people who roll their eyes and have some doubts. And the Warrens, they had a lot of controversy later in their career. But in this podcast, when we're talking about the supernatural, I think both of us agree that we come from the side of belief. Good or bad, we may not understand it, but we know something is there. And a first step is knowledge. So, like anything, it's what you do with what you know. And what did you ask something? Oh, yeah. So at its core,
Demonology.
a demonologist is a person who studies demons, demonic beliefs, rituals, and well, just all things demons related and the occult. And in this field of study, it's pretty broad and I'd say pretty dangerous. I think unless you have some really good Vatican connections, it's not easy to track down those 1,000-year-old manuscripts. And, the focus and the drive to be able to sit down and study and retain all this would just be incredible.
Yeah, it is definitely a fascination. If anyone loves research or scientific work, and the paranormal, it makes sense. Do we know how the Warrens got into the supernatural? Was it because Lorraine was a medium or a psychic?
Think it was a combination of things. But honestly, they were both artists. Ed was actually studying art. And so, the paranormal as a career, I think was the furthest from his mind. Occult work wasn't even on the radar, but Ed did have some paranormal experiences and I think some haunted house experiences when he was younger. And so that was kind of a fascination for him. Lorraine was actually a big skeptic around ghosts because she'd never encountered paranormal energy, but
Mhm.
the haunted houses was
Yeah.
definitely there for Ed.
Yeah, I mean, who's not fascinated with a good ghost story?
Right, right. And I think the first haunted house that they visited was the Oceanborn Mary House, and that's in New Hampshire where they are, where they're kind of centered there. And that's where Lorraine encountered that paranormal energy for the first time. And that sort of stirred something in Ed when he watched his wife go through that. So he began, researching more haunted houses in the area and he would go and he would sketch them. And after the sketch was done, he and Lorraine would like go up to the house and knock on the door and be like, "Hey, we sketched this house for you. I heard it was haunted." And then they just kind of strike up a conversation with the homeowner about their paranormal investigations. And that's how they slowly started investigating these houses. And they started to help people who were having these experiences. And then after that, and this was kind of a strange thing, but after they would help the homeowners with their haunted houses, Ed would then paint the house for real. And he would take it to their art shows and sell these finished paintings of these haunted houses. And then they would also have this provenance of the story behind the haunted house, how it was haunted and things like that. And that's what kind of launched them into the occult world. Eventually, people started seeking them out. They'd be like, hey, we heard you help these people down here with this haunted house. We kind of have a problem. Can you come take a look at that? So, yeah, actually, art.
Yeah. Yeah, that is fascinating. I didn't know any of that. I'm very curious of what his paintings look like.
You know,
So I have to check that out.
yeah, they're kind of interesting. Most of them were scenic paintings of barns and houses, picturesque, New England would look. He did start to paint with the haunted houses. Some of them had a few ghosts painted in them. I'll try to find some and post them in our show notes for our listeners.
Yeah, that would be great. It's interesting to me, really, their focus there and people coming to them was really what the topic of today's episode is, and it's the uninvited. So people were seeking them out to help resolve the uninvited. And so when you go back to our opening story and visit that conversation that Eve had with the serpent, and there's kind of that connection there. That was the original OG happening of the uninvited supernatural encounter. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, 1,000%. And back to Eve real quick. I just want to explain something. So we use the phrase nakash, and nakash is the original Hebrew that it's translated from, and it's a fascinating word. It actually has three different meanings. The first one would be a snake or a serpent, which is where we get that reference there. Adam and Eve were in the garden with the snake. And the second, though, is a verb, and it's divination or sorcery, like we see all throughout our stories. It actually means to practice divination or sorcery or witchcraft, like we saw in Samuel with the witch of Endor. And the third meaning of this word is to shine, which is like bronze or a gleaming metal, or to even glow. It's a fascinating word. It's got three roots to the word, and it's nun, chet, shin, or actually, if you put them all together, it's to hiss like a snake, divine, and to shine. So it probably wasn't a snake that Adam and Eve were talking to. It was probably a shiny being that had sentience and was something that we aren't familiar with. And if you look at a different translation in the Bible, the NIS Bible, for instance, it translates it as the shiny one was more clever than the animals of the field. I don't want to dig too deep in there, but a being of light, that's my takeaway. If you and I'm not trying to go against what anybody believes, but if it had been a talking snake that was talking to Adam and Eve, then why was the curse to crawl on its belly such a terrible curse? Because snakes, as we know them, already crawl on their bellies. So just a little side takeaway there that I thought was interesting.
And we need to dig deeper into the Bible, and we will do that. But let's take it back to Mr. Zellner and his dark spirits. Imagine evoking spirits and not thinking there would be any consequence.
Yeah, no, I can't. I wouldn't want to mess with that at all. But then again, I don't think he thought there'd be any consequences, and that's one of the real dangers of messing around with the darkness. I feel a lot of people don't see it as a real threat, so no harm, no foul. If I don't believe it, it can't hurt me. And if they do see it as real, they aren't thinking clearly.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Disbelief and denial, sadly, those are even more powerful than faith that we have. Satan and his demons, they are sitting there in the shadows and watching. It's really easy to discount something rather to believe it. I think you're right, Mary. We no longer really see evil for what it is. It's so normalized in today's time, going out with the girls, getting it, having lunch and having some wine and getting a tarot card reading,
Oh, yeah.
visiting the voodoo shop. There's lots of different things, mocking ancient festivals. It's just become a culture of fun, games, and entertainment. And I think that's where we are kind of falling into the gray line. There's really zero fear in today's time, zero fear about opening a door to the supernatural. But I'd say that most people, they're not out there like Mr. Zellner, setting up an entire room in their home. And I mean, I love antiques. I go to the antique store and peruse the antique store all the
I love
time.
them too.
And even our mothers, yeah, our mothers, our aunts, and our grandmother, they all loved the knickknacks. And after hearing and sharing Zellner's story of that ornate mirror, in a room, I think it's really important that we don't overlook a vessel, especially the vessel that he used, which was a mirror. We don't overlook the possibility of what could come in uninvited when we bring those things home. So, what if the Warrens didn't take that mirror? And what if Mr. Zellner just put the mirror back on the curb for the trash? Good riddance. And then we come along and we pick it up. What do you think?
Well, now we have a haunted house. But to your point, things don't usually come with a warning label. They don't usually say, "Hey, if you bring me home, I'm gonna haunt you." So I would say that, yes, we should use caution if we're bringing in something maybe new and old into our home. You're not wrong. I would have probably taken a good old ornate mirror that I found on the curb home with me. If it was in good shape,
Right? Yeah,
it was in good shape.
absolutely.
I
Me
mean, I'd
too.
take that.
Yes, and we often drive by and see things people have left on the curb, and you think to yourself, "That looks perfectly fine. Let me turn around and pick it up."
But
And, people do that.
yep, no shame.
But,
No shame.
that's absolutely, we love a good collectible around here. We're using Zellner as an example here, but when you pick something up, how long before spirits or the evil, whispers their way into their home? Is it right away? Is it not ever? Is it, maybe something that's passed down to your children and then it starts to, whisper in the ears of our children and it lays in wait. It could be years before anything could happen, just like I mentioned. So I think it's just, we want to really be cognizant of that. Spirits can just drift right out and possess something else. Let's say we bring something home and we no longer want the mirror, but the spirit could drift right back into something else in our home. And then here we are stuck with that uninvited. So that makes me wonder if we shouldn't be a little bit more cautious, especially myself, when I'm perusing that antique store and what we decide to bring home. And I have an example of my own. If you might recall the story that I've shared about
Oh yeah.
outside of my mother's bedroom door. And, I'll give a quick little story about that for our listeners. I was a young 4, 5 years old little girl. I woke up in the middle of the night and I'm coming down the hall, and right directly at the end of the hall, across the living room, was my mother's bedroom door. So I could see it from some distance. And as I'm walking down this dark hallway, I see something moving in the distance. The room was illuminated by a large fish tank that my mother had. She loved her fish. And I could see something. The light from the fish tank was just enough. I could see something kind of pacing back and forth in front of my mother's bedroom. I, sleepy little kid, rubbed my eyes so I could focus in on it. And it was the lion. My mother had a statue of a lion outside of her bedroom door, and it was moving. And I will never forget realizing in that moment what I was seeing. And I was young, but old enough to be fully aware of what I was seeing and how I wanted no part of that.
Yeah.
I stopped. I turned right back around. I took myself to my bedroom, and I never really spoke of that. And it was, of course, I was a child, so I couldn't tell you how much time had passed, but some time had passed. And then I heard my mom telling my dad one day, "Get rid of that lion. It's evil." And my dad took it and threw it in the well out on the property.
And that's how we get those
And
haunted wells, Haley. Come on.
yes, we should plan a trip to go revisit that land. It would be somewhat interesting, but I didn't really share that. I didn't really link what I had seen with my own eyes and my mother wanting to get rid of that until much later in life. When we go through things as children, we tend to block that out. But later in life, I was probably in my late 20s, I brought that up. I kind of linked those two events together, remembering what I had saw and what my mom had instructed my dad. So her and I had discussed that much, much later in life, 20 years later. And connected the story of the evil and that she could sense that as well.
Your story, it reminds me that evil, invited or uninvited, is seeking to devour us. And for our listeners out there, Haley and I are believers in Christ. That's to say, we do believe in supernatural evil. And you may not be a believer. So your take on the supernatural might be more scientific and proof based, or you might just be one that just doesn't believe in anything. And that's great. We love having you listen to us. We hope you continue to. We would just like for you to keep an open mind. Not everything can be proven. And sometimes there is more to a situation than just science.
Yes, it is. And that's why it's just really important to listen to our spirit and trust that feeling.
Yeah,
When we are bringing something new into our homes or any situation we might find ourselves in. It's when something or someone feels off or you become uncomfortable, you got to set that down and walk away. Like a material item or a person, listen to your instincts. If it's crazy, if it's that crazy intense feeling, call on the name of Jesus.
sure.
That is the first thing that we need to absolutely understand and go to. We see and hear that time and time again. People who don't know Jesus who will think to speak his name in whatever situation they are in, and that threat retreats. People who are non believers, there's so many stories of non believers being in a situation and they just stop and they call on the name of Jesus and they're saved. There's so many testimonies to this.
I mean, it's such a good point. When in doubt, pull it back to Jesus. But I want to kind of back up to your lion tail there. I have a question for you. At such a young age, I mean, you said you were like 4 or 5. Do you think that seeing that line pacing back and forth jaded you to the supernatural where you just didn't notice it anymore? Or it just pushed you closer to the supernatural as you grew up? Or did you I guess you kind of alluded to it, you just kind of forgot about?
Well, I would say that it clearly pushed me closer to being I'm obviously a believer. I know what I saw. And Mary, I've had these kind of experiences all of my life. So I am a believer. I do have experiences. I still have experiences. And I think it's not something that is kind of common in every house. But every home that I've ever lived in, I've had experiences unique to each house, but definitely has pushed me closer to the supernatural.
Yeah, wow. I sometimes wonder if it's just our family line. We'll get into generational curses and things like that in later episodes, but I've had similar experiences, but I never talked to people about those encounters really until I was much older. And there was one time I tried to, and I was just so upset. I ran upstairs to my mom. I mean, she did not believe me, but she just looked straight at me and she said, "We don't open those doors, Mary. We close them. We don't tell anybody, and we just forget about it." So I stayed silent, and eventually, all the things that happened when I was little, they kind of faded away, and I just kind of tucked them away and forgot about them until I didn't.
Right. And unfortunately, I think that happens way more often than most people would want to acknowledge. I think many of us have paranormal or supernatural experiences
Absolutely.
that you just don't want to talk about, whether it's too afraid or you might be ridiculed or they just don't want to face it. Those are all, it's really a unique experience. And, I think sometimes some people might think that there's something wrong with them. And then we just try to tuck that away or we try to rationalize it. You think about all the ghost hunting adventure shows, they always try to debunk different things. And I think if you've had an experience, if you've tried to talk to a pastor at a church and they just shrugged it off, it's in your mind, you might feel turned away. And if that has ever happened to anyone that's listening to this, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and if you'd like to tell someone, check out our show notes for our contact information. We'd love to hear them, and maybe we can point you towards someone who could help you through whatever it is you're going through. We'd love to help.
Mary, we do need priests and pastors to speak more on these principalities that we wrestle against. We should be more open and acknowledging the supernatural, just like we said previously, of how that OG supernatural was speaking to Eve. So if we even take it back that far, no one told Eve that it was all in her mind and to say a prayer. Yet in a world where evil is somehow being made less evil, it's doing a lot of damage.
Yeah. So maybe we should ask a question. And maybe mostly in these first world, Western world, when did we stop believing in the supernatural? We've just kind of turned
Yep.
it into a show, right?
Yeah, exactly. There it is. And at what point did we all go, well, that's just crazy talk. It's not demons. It's not haunted. The ground isn't cursed. And there's a reason. If we were to travel to third world countries and left the luxury resort that we all are looking to book and went out into that culture, would we not see supernaturals front and center? Front and center. They believe in powerful entities, spirits, dark magic, all those things. It's still woven into their culture. And so we call that a little backwoods, maybe uncivilized. And I think they have an advantage that in this first world country, we don't.
You're right about third world countries, Haley. I've seen that firsthand. I went on a mission trip years and years ago. I don't know if I've told you the story. I don't really think I've told anybody this story, but we were at this nursing home and they had gathered all the elderly in one big room. Everyone was in a circle and we're singing and teaching them Jesus loves me and sharing the gospel, handing out snacks. And I just kind of happened to glance down the hall and not very far. It wasn't a really big nursing home, so not very far, but in the shadows, just down at the end of this hall, was a lone gentleman sitting. He was just sitting there all by himself. And I thought, well, maybe he needed some help making it to the room. Nothing else crossed my mind. So I broke off from the group. I just went down the hall to get him. And as I got closer, I could see that he was very thin and frail and super old. And he was just hunched over. His hair was long and white and kind of stringy, and it hung down over his face. And he just seemed to be sleeping. He didn't respond when I was like saying, hi, hello. And so I got in real close and I knelt down. And I mean, just as I went to touch him, just to like gently wake him up, my hand reached out and something just screamed inside of me. And I just jerked my hand back real fast, like in a half a second. I went to touch him and I was like, whoop, nope, I'm not going to touch him. And in that instant, he jerked his head up and he was present. And he had these faded blue eyes that were clouded with cataracts, but he locked on to me. He saw me, and then he started to speak in this low, unrecognizable language, just like this growling type thing. And his body just became twisted somehow. And it wasn't because of his age or, the fact that he was real thin. It was just he was wrong. And I knew in that moment that it was a possession and just nothing but pure evil. And so I stumbled back and I think I said the name of Jesus. I really don't remember. I moved so quickly and I rebuked what I saw. I just was like, I remember wiping my hands on my pants, this uneasiness following me. And I glanced behind me to make sure he wasn't like running after me. It was very real and very fast. And I wasn't expecting that. We were there to minister to the elderly and to the children. It wasn't even on my radar that something like that could be encountered on that mission trip. I was with a Christian group. We were sharing the gospel, but my faith wasn't strong enough to handle that. I'm not an exorcist. I had no idea what to do. I wouldn't recommend trying to do an exorcism on anything. We were just there handing out coloring sheets and peanut butter sandwiches, not prepared to be facing a cursed man left alone in the dark. He needed deliverance and prayer, and that was more that I could offer. I mean, I ran away. And so a lot of times I think about that and I pray about him because that's all I could do. But then I start thinking, what if I had touched him? What if in that moment something didn't pull my hand back and I had touched him? Would a spirit have latched on to me as a Christian? I mean, I do believe that as a Christian, they will latch on to you. You can be oppressed by a demonic a spirit. You might not be possessed, but you can certainly be oppressed by them and they will follow you around. So, yeah, in a really long, roundabout way, I do believe you when you brought up the third world countries. That's an excellent point. To them, it's just they see it all the time. But here in the USA, if something like that happens, they're going to call you crazy or senile if you're older. But sometimes there might be something more. And if you're really up against the wall, oh, what are you're going to call ghost hunters or you try the Catholics? But again, like they did with the case of Zellner, the Catholics turned him away. They couldn't help it.
Yeah. And, to that point, other cultures embracing what evil is by recognizing it. How do we recognize evil when we can't even recognize Jesus?
Well, that's so true. That's so true. Have you heard the phrase creeping normality?
I have not.
Yeah, I just kind of heard about it. And I think it sums up the culture of the first world countries and the Western world beautifully. Basically, creepy normality is when something in culture arrives so slowly that at first it might seem off, but then it seems harmless. And then another layer of the same thing comes. And again, it feels off, or that just seems wrong. But then it fades and it seems harmless. And it just keeps pushing the line with each exposure, so that what was once unthinkable in a culture becomes normal. Let me give you an example. So, do you remember, like when we went to church, we would dress up to the nines? Remember
Mm-hmm.
that you wore your Sunday best.
Yes.
We'd go to church, suit, tie, dress shoes, heels, pantyhose. Oh, I hate pantyhose. And anyway, you didn't eat, you didn't drink when you were in the sanctuary. But nowadays, and I'm not attacking modern Christians, but now you'll see people rolling into church in their jammies and slippers. They're in the
Hmm.
sanctuary. They haven't given an ounce of thought to what they're wearing. Not only that, but they're stopping at the coffee shop right outside the sanctuary door, grabbing their bagel and their coffee to bring into the sanctuary for worship. And not too long ago, that would have been unthinkable. You just wouldn't do that. But slowly, over time, what was offensive became normal. And we can see that in other examples of things that slowly, over time, have become normal that probably shouldn't be normal. We see that all over the Western world today in different and drastic mindsets. And we're not going to get political here, but in every aspect of our culture, not just in religion. Does that make sense to you?
It does. And do you remember the satanic panic in the 80s? Now, I was, I'm a young 80s baby. So I just remember some pieces of this. Of course, I have older siblings, but it was the satanic panic of the 80s that all the parents were vigilant against with what we watched and what their kids did. But if you think about today and you look around, I mean, the Church of Satan itself is a recognized church, which brings up another interesting fact. We've done a little bit of research for today's podcast. Only 56% of Americans believe in the devil. And over across the pond in the UK, only 18% of people believe in the devil. That's really quite concerning. And like you said, Mary, we don't want to get political in our episodes, but just look at what's happening in Europe right now. And it does make you wonder if there's a bigger relationship between belief in the devil more than we might realize. And, when you search back to the 80s, it was estimated that about, no pun intended, but in the 80s, it was estimated that about 80% of Americans believed in the devil, thus that big satanic panic.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, if you want to disarm a people or nations and invite yourself in, what's the best way to do that? You make them believe that you, the devil, are no threat. And what's that one quote? The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing a world he doesn't exist. And I'd say the world is falling for that lie. We are falling for that lie very quickly. We've been desensitized to real paranormal evil through movies. And listen, I myself have watched a lot of paranormal movies, and I don't do that so much anymore. So because that is normalizing what we know is so real. And it's normalizing it almost to the point that even if we do see something supernatural, we probably wouldn't run away from it. We'd pull our phones out, maybe record it, hey, and then hey, send it over to your best friend and say, "Look what we got."
Right. You
Do
want that
you
clear photo.
do you remember? Yes. I mean, we have done that. Do you remember us going to a
We did.
cemetery and just seeing what we could do or what we could find, um, in terms of spirits? You remember?
I do, I do. It was our one unexplainable ghost hunting adventure because we did. We saw that one shadow that wasn't there, but it showed up on the camera later. And
You were the only one that would go with me, and,
I'm always
I
up
thought
for
it was
something
cool.
a little
I've
creepy.
always I've always been intrigued by, cemeteries for some reason, but my point being, the supernatural, it doesn't hold as much fear as it once did. And
You're right.
back in the day, digging back to our Appalachian roots, and again, another episode for later, so
Mhm.
everybody get excited about that one. But
Yeah,
you didn't mess with those spirits. And I know there's a lot of hee hee ha ha's, especially if you get on TikTok and people talking about the Appalachia. But really and truly, you still don't mess with those spirits. However, in today's modern times, and I think because people don't believe it's real, they taunt that other side on purpose. And you can see that through these videos that people share
yeah, we
and
don't
not
wanna do
even
that.
realizing, absolutely, we do not. They don't even realize what they're doing because they don't believe in it. And that's why the Conjuring franchise, scary movies, ghost hunters, mediums, and shows, they're so popular. Evil and the paranormal has become a commodity.
Yeah,
We can't say that any clearer. It's become a commodity in our world, and that uninvited darkness is just waiting to walk right in as the star of the show. They're the evil and those spirits, they're just lining right up, and we are paying for it.
you're 100% right. Like, if we walk it back to the Warrens again, they were trying to expose darkness around them, and to actually battle it. I think it kind of backfired in a sense because instead of that real exposure to evil that they were trying to maybe wake people up to, kind of we've developed almost a junkie-like fascination for the supernatural, and I think they kind of started that catalyst. I mean, it has always been there. Look back to the Greeks. Every civilization was fascinated with contacting spirits and the underworld and death. But yeah, I think the fascination is growing and it's growing exponentially. But unfortunately, the fear or reverence that maybe once was with that has faded. I mean, I watch
Yeah,
scary movies
it's something you
too.
mentioned, and something you mentioned, Mary, that I think was really a good point was it's almost like being a junkie. And absolutely, it becomes an addiction. And if you think about that at a little bit deeper level, that makes so much sense. Like I mentioned, and you just mentioned as well, we're watching scary movies. I think we're just kind of talking to ourselves here, and we're not judging anyone,
No, not
but
at all.
we can so easily fall into that it's not a big deal mentality. And what did you call it? The
Creepy
creeping
normality of,
normality. Back in the day, I played with the Ouija board a little bit. At that
oh,
time, it was
geez.
just a game that we picked up at the Walmarts. But when you think totally, it was a totally normal thing to do. I mean, they just sold it at a department store. How big of a deal can this be? But again, we were just kids. We didn't think about anything, much less us summoning anything or something. So I think for us, did we think it was more than a game? No. We kind of enjoyed that excitement and thrill of it, and being able to go to school and talk to our friends about it. And you even saw it in the movies. It's harmless until it's not. So before anybody that's listening goes and buys a Ouija board, or you pull the old one out of your closet, and honestly, if you have it in your closet, just maybe find a well to go throw it in, or maybe not, just maybe dispose of that. But I think we should talk about like the history of a Ouija board.
Yeah, okay. Some people might not even realize that there is a history to the Ouija board. So, yeah.
Absolutely, there is.
So what do you
So,
got?
before yeah, okay, I did a little research, and
We like our
let's
research.
look at it. So, before they were called Ouija boards, they were called spirit boards or talking boards. And they made their introduction during the Spiritist movement in the 1880s. My goodness, that seems so long ago. But
It
they
does.
were used specifically to talk with the dead. So, necromancy, dark magic, it is what it is. And if you, I find it really hard that there are people that possibly have never seen a Ouija board. I don't know. But if you've not seen one, a Ouija board or a spirit board that's marked with letters and numbers, and you use it to communicate with spirits through a sliding pointer called a planchette. So that's the little triangle thing with a little magnifying glass at the top. And the spirit would guide the hand of the user to spell out answers to their questions. The term Ouija, some say, means good luck, and others say it means yes. Either way, the board was marketed for profit during the Civil War. Wow. That's, again, a very evil commodity there. So it was marketed during the Civil War, feeding off of a grief stricken nation desperate to talk to dead loved ones one final time. The first produced board was made way back in 1891 by Charles Kennard. I don't think he's alive anymore, but I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his last name. Charles
I think you got
Kennard,
it
and
right.
made its first appearance, perfect, made its first appearance in Hollywood in the 1920s in a cartoon, if you can believe that, a cartoon. And then in the 1944 film, The Uninvited, which is about, spoiler, ghosts and talking to the dead. So clearly, all the way back to the 1880s to now, the Ouija board's nothing new. It's just been rebranded, packaged, and sold as a harmless game. But history tells us on the darker side of that, it's evolution. It began from that same witchcraft, and slowly that Ouija board evolved. Using it became easier, access to it became easier. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's going to invite some hidden things into your life. Maybe you have and you just don't know it, and it's sitting there in the shadows waiting.
Yeah, I think we just stopped paying attention. There's TikToks, there's videos. We're always on our phone. We're always scrolling. The world's just loud. And so when it comes to a dark whisper, we don't hear it. All we hear is, it's just a movie, it's just a concert, it's just a song. I think slowly over time, the Ouija boards, they've been evolving. They're easier to use, easier to access. We're no longer seeing it as necromancy, which is that dark witchcraft that you want to talk to the dead or the spirits, and we just don't know what we're contacting. So maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but it is always, always inviting something uninvited into your home, and you're just not realizing it. We're just so distracted today with always being on our phones, always watching something. We don't even look at our lives around us. We're looking to other people's lives. We're not paying attention anymore. We don't see evil for evil. We convince ourselves we're being silly if we're feeling a little uneasy and we don't want to do it. We're just like, oh no, that's silly. I'm going to go ahead and do it. And sometimes even the church backs something that they shouldn't be backing, but they are. And it goes back to it's that first one, it's that first time that we do it. But that first time, that gives them the legal right to enter into your life. We've just handed that over.
And again, we're not judging anyone. Everything we've talked about, we ourselves, we've done or experienced. Just highlighting a few ways that the uninvited evil gets into our lives. And like you said, Mary, you are absolutely just handing them a license to come in and run amok. And so we're not saying don't go to that movie, you'll get possessed, right, Mary? We're
Well,
not saying those
we're
things.
not saying that either, though.
We are just trying to say that there can be consequences and evil in the unseen realm. It's very real, and don't ignore that.
Absolutely. Evil's real. Please don't ever think that it's not. Evil doesn't always come in, horns and a pitchfork, but sometimes it comes in something like light and comfort. We just want to start talking about it, and we've been lied to and deceived for far too long about everything. So Haley and I just want to start having conversations about all these encounters and these strange things that we're seeing all over the world.
Yes, Mary, really far too long have we been deceived. And at the end of the day, it's just time for us all to dust the Bible off, start talking about that weird stuff, and stop being afraid of what people think when we do bring up these conversations. It's something happening in our world, and we're here for it. So, again, always just pull it back to Jesus. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And until next time on Rebel Road.
Bye.
Bye.